The Saw franchise is back on the big screen with Spiral, so today I'm going to stop and rank all 9 Saw films from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place to consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of the Saw films. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list and I would love to see yours. And as a point of reference, I hadn't seen any of the Saw films during their original run, but when Jigsaw came out, I decided to binge through all the movies, watch them so I could understand that film, and then do a ranking of them. So I'm a newer person when it comes to the franchise, so I'll probably have a little bit of a different perspective from the long-term fans of the franchise. With that said, let's get started. Coming in last place is Saw 6. Now, based off what I've read on the internet, it appears this is a bit of a hot take, and a number of you are actually pretty big fans of this one. For me, my big issue with it is that at some point in time, they decided to make Hoffman the star and the focus of this franchise, and I just don't find him all that interesting of a character. So now we have the second film in a row where he's like this master escape artist where he takes out 3 cops, he gets captured, he's put in the reverse bear trap, he manages to escape that as well, and I just don't feel like they've done anything to make him interesting enough for me to want him to actually be able to escape all of this. In fact, I'm rooting for all the people trying to catch him. I want him to get caught, and then they keep catching him, and then he just magically escapes. And to me, that's the most tedious thing about the entire Saw franchise, is that this guy keeps escaping for reasons that I don't feel are earned or justified, and everyone else is doing the work to catch him, and then he just escapes. Then the other thing going on with this particular movie is that there's a series of games going on related to insurance agents, and it has almost no ties whatsoever to the Hoffman plotline. This is something they did in a bunch of these later sequels where there's 2 virtually unconnected storylines going on, and I don't think that's particularly good screenwriting, the way that they structured some of these films. And then with the game itself, it's designed in a way where someone has to die. It blatantly violates Jigsaw's rules about not wanting to be a killer if someone has to die with the way the games are designed. And finally, the movie gets awfully preachy about the evils of insurance companies for a Saw film.
Wow, that was weird.
And if you take its message seriously, it's kind of dangerous and offensive because it's trying to justify brutally killing people for working in insurance. So put it all together, and this one has the most things about it that frustrate me about the Saw franchise. Coming in at number 8 is Saw 3D, or Saw 8. Now, honestly, I find this movie to be just as bad as Saw 6, but Saw 6 was a little bit too self-important and preachy, and this one seems to know that it's a bad movie, and it embraces the schlocky fun, so you just get non-stop carnage right there on the screen, so it just inches it out by only just a little bit, but it has a lot of the same problems I had with Saw 6. Once again, the plot line about the guy pretending to be a survivor of Jigsaw that gets put in a game, it has no real connections to the main plot line about Hoffman. Once again, innocent people are brutally killed in the game. That just feels like a total violation of Jigsaw's rules, and it's not entertaining to me when it's like the guy's wife is dying because he's a liar. Like, that removes the whole philosophy that makes Jigsaw interesting when it literally is just watching innocent people being tortured. Beyond that, once again, Hoffman is just able to escape stuff. He's able to break into a police station and kill everyone, get away with everything. And so it just strains so much credibility, all for the purpose of taking a character I don't care about, that I don't find interesting, that they haven't found a way to justify why he's such a good escape artist, and once again, he's just successful, and all the people using their wits and cleverness to catch him are the ones failing. I don't enjoy that about some of these movies, and so easily these 2 are at the bottom for me, and this one only inches it out because it's a little bit more schlocky fun and not as self-important. Next up is Saw 4. Now, I feel like there's 2 big dramatic things that hurt the franchise after Saw 3. The first one is that at the end of Saw 3, they killed off John Kramer. and in doing so, wrote themselves into a corner that they didn't know how to get out of. Speaking of the writers, that leads us to the second problem, and the first 3 movies' stories and writing came from Leigh Whannell and James Wan, and then for the next 4 sequels, they switched to Felton and Dunstan, and I just don't think they are nearly on the same writing level as James Wan and Leigh Whannell, and it seriously hurt the next 4 films in the franchise. Now, on the positive side, I appreciate the addition of Scott Patterson as Strom. I'm familiar with him from Gilmore Girls, which is about as different from Saw 4 as you can get, but he adds in just enough charisma, and he's a good character that has some success, which I appreciate about him as an addition. Likewise, there's something oddly addictive about the way this movie intertwines the plot lines of parts 2, 3, and 4 all together into one to kind of pay off with this film, and that's kind of neat. I have my issues with the way some of it gets convoluted, but I appreciate they tried to do something different. But the big thing that kind of hurts this movie for me is that I just don't find Rigg interesting as a character at all. He just doesn't have anything about him that's enough to carry the whole story. I'm not rooting for him, I'm not rooting against him. I just don't really care about him as he's going through this game and people are being tortured all around him. Likewise, as we get to the final reveal and twist, at first it's a bit like, oh, that was kind of clever. And at the same time, I was also like, isn't this kind of like repeating the twist from the end of the first movie, just a little bit more elaborate with more pieces involved, but just felt too reminiscent to do that style of reveal. So it wasn't nearly as effective and felt very familiar. So this is one for me that has some things I did appreciate about it, but also was the kickoff of my least favorite stretch of Saw films. Number 6 is Saw 5. Honestly, in my mind, Saw 4 and 5 kind of tied with each other. Each of them have things about them that are a little bit better and things about them that frustrate me a little bit. What probably elevates this one over it, at least at the time of this recording, is that I found the actors or characters in the game itself to be more watchable and engaging. Several people that are on a number of TV shows that I've enjoyed throughout the years, Julie Benz, of course, being one of them, some actors from 24 being in there. And so they just brought a little bit more to it that made them pop a bit as I watched them tortured for 90 minutes. The other thing I kind of liked about this one was that we get Hoffman's backstory. As much as I'm not a big fan of the Hoffman character, don't think that he remotely deserved 4 movies dedicated to him, this is the one at least that spends time helping us understand how he became this character, where did he get into the mix, where did he go off from Jigsaw's worldview and philosophy and everything like that. And so maybe for those reasons elevates it just a little bit. But once again, as you get to the end of the film, Strom figures it out, is able to track him down, and instead of actually catching Hoffman has devised this elaborate game and room where in fact he's the one that dies the horrible death and gets framed for murder. And it's just not very satisfying when you have characters that use their wits to solve a mystery and they're rewarded with a torturous death versus the character that seems like they made a bunch of mistakes and got caught and they're rewarded by framing someone else. That's pretty frustrating. As I mentioned before, the 4 films from Dunstan and Melton are my least favorite of the Saw films. I don't like that they focus so much on Hoffman. I don't like the way that they structure the stories in a way that the game itself is virtually totally detached from the police investigation that's going on. And likewise, in the games themselves, there's an abandonment of Jigsaw's philosophy. So you just see people being tortured to death. People have to die. And it seems like a violation of what was established in the earlier films. And that runs all throughout their 4 films. And that's why they're at the bottom. In 5th place is Jigsaw. Right off the bat, this movie feels like something fresh and new, and not just the next episode of the Saw show like 4 through 7 felt like. The way it's shot, the nature of the story, the characters involved, it's all just a little bit different. The way the story integrates the actual game itself with the investigation kind of kept me engaged as it felt like a single story with mysteries, things I was trying to figure out not just Hoffman trying to escape for 90 minutes while watching a totally different group of people being tortured. I appreciated the cohesiveness of the story. It definitely has its nasty, gory moments, but it doesn't just linger on it for overly long shots just to gross out the audience. So I like that it's gory, but not too disgusting in the way that the moments play out. Now, certainly this movie has a lot of flaws. The timeline, the logic of it, especially as you know the twist, you know why the logic and timing doesn't line up with a bunch of things. But as you're watching it, it's just like, this doesn't make sense. How did this person get here? How did they do this? So certainly logic doesn't flow with it. And of the Saw movies, it's one of the ones that feels the least consequential. It lacks kind of the rich depth of mythology. It's just kind of like, yeah, let's just do one more Saw movie, one more adventure of people getting tortured with a bit of a mystery in it. But I appreciated that it works as a standalone story. It's resolved by the end of it, and it's trying to be cohesive in all the elements that are taking place. Next up, Saw 3, the final Saw film with a story from James Wan and Leigh Whannell, and the final one written by Leigh Whannell. And I think you see that in the structure of the story. It just has a little bit more wit and cleverness to the structure of what takes place, and feels like the writer is ahead of the audience and set up the twists and payoff and reveals better than in the later films in the franchise. At the same time, it also feels a little bit like they're stretching their concept a bit thin at this point in time. The movie is kind of structured in a weird way where there's like 30 minutes at the beginning doing all this early stuff of people in traps and getting killed before the actual plotline and story kick into play, and the guy with the revenge motive finds himself in the middle of a game. But for me, I think the cast here makes a big difference when they bring in the guy from Braveheart. Here I am! To be the person going through all these challenges with this moral dilemma of this guy that's been out for revenge and now has a chance to watch these people suffer. There's something interesting with that idea. Likewise, the big standout character of the whole franchise is Jigsaw, John Kramer, and this is one of only 2 films in the franchise where you spend a lot of time with him before he dies, sharing his thoughts, ideas, his worldview with kind of what's going on, taunting people just a little bit, letting you know kind of where he's coming from. So a movie that I don't think it's one of the top tier best of the franchise, but it has some of the stronger elements of the franchise and starts to touch on some of the weaknesses where I'm not quite sure I understand how Jigsaw bringing the guy's wife into the mix and what happens to her fits in line with Jigsaw's philosophy, a recurring issue with this franchise, but does deliver a lot of memorable sequences in this franchise, in particular the rack, which I just found to be such a horrifying trap. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to join me down below in the comments section. Let me know your ranking of the Saw films. My list is not the right list. It's just my list, and I'm someone that's relatively new to this franchise, and I would love to see yours as people that probably know it a little bit better than me. Also, if you enjoyed this video, I've done a bunch of horror franchise rankings right up here in this playlist. Friday the 13th, Halloween, Purge, Conjuring. I've done like 20 of them. If you're enjoying this video, there's more like it right up there. In third place is Spiral, the latest Saw film, and functionally, this is more of a Saw spin-off than directly a Saw film, as it's a movie set in the same universe with someone aware of Jigsaw, inspired by Jigsaw, but really it's telling kind of its own story, its own detective mystery. And I appreciated that it was kind of getting back to the basics where we're following a detective who's investigating a serial killer and we don't know who it is, why they're doing it, what's behind it. So we have a mystery, we have intrigue. Functionally, it's a little bit like Saw Light, and I don't mind that. I think that that's a good direction to take things with this franchise. Thought Chris Rock was a very nice addition to put at the center of the movie. Some people, I don't think, can buy him as a detective. I don't have that issue because I saw him in Lethal Weapon 4 over 20 years ago. And so the idea of him kind of being in this movie, able to add levity in a way that's just organic for him. It doesn't feel like it's cutting the tension. He's just naturally has funny things that he says that feel like things that people say to other people. So I think it just added a little bit of humor into the franchise without violating the rules or tone of the franchise. Of course, Samuel L. Jackson is one of the most charismatic actors out there, so just a nice little addition. And when you have that kind of star power in the film, it just elevates the whole thing. At the same time, the final twist, the final reveal, it's too predictable. Like, could see that one coming quite a bit out. And as you get to the end of it, the franchise has continually had the problem of not knowing how to replace John Kramer. No one they've come up with is nearly as fascinating or interesting, and that's similarly the problem here, where it's like, okay, I guess that's the guy's motivation, but I mean, he's no John Kramer. He's no Jigsaw. He's just a guy capturing people, torturing them for his own motivations and reasons. So it's just not quite as interesting once you get to the final payoff as some of the earlier Saw films were. Our runner-up is the original Saw, a film that presents itself as a mystery, as both the characters in the film as well as the audience, we don't know what's going on. We're just dropped in the middle of this room, left to try and guess what's happening. And 15 minutes in, it starts to kind of flashbacks and fleshing out the backstory of this world of everything that's taking place. It's also a movie that low-key has a great cast. Of course, you have Danny Glover and Carl Elwes in there, but a lot of the side characters, the people that just show up there, a lot of those, hey, it's that guy. Those types of characters actors show up in this movie an awful lot. It's also a movie that had a very small budget, and so instead of going for big and flashy, they tried to go smarter and have a bunch of interesting concepts and this idea of Jigsaw and what motivated him, and then it uses the structure to be able to get the most bang for their buck and get the most time with the most actors in the most different places, while at the same time still telling a very small story. Now, I do think the limited budget hurts the films at certain points in time because they're trying so hard to get as much done with spending as little money as possible. And you can feel that while you're watching this film, but still, it's very clear that they had a talented director behind the camera and a talented writer behind the typewriter, since I'm sure he wrote it on a typewriter. And you see that on the screen, despite the fact that it has a micro budget by comparison to most movies that make as much money as this movie made and kick off a franchise the way that this movie did. But coming in first place is Saw 2. For me, this is the sequel to Saw that I wanted, the continuation that made sense to me. It's a more straightforward narrative that gets to the urgency very quickly. Right off the bat, our lead character's son is kidnapped, and we are in the middle of go mode trying to rescue his son while people are in the middle of one of these games. But really, the thing that elevates this one to the top is that John Kramer is front and center. We get to spend time with him, his mind games, while he's toying with the police, presenting his idea, his worldview, all of that stuff. He is the character that all this franchise came from. And there's only a few of these movies where we get to spend significant time with him. He's just so good at tormenting the cops that are around him. All of it leads up to a big twist reveal that felt earned and made sense in light of John Kramer, in light of what he told them earlier on. So it paid off so well. So I just think by having a more straightforward narrative, it made it a lot easier to kind of connect with the characters, the mystery, and feel the urgency of what was taking place. Of course, putting John Kramer front and center was a big advantage, and it didn't hurt that the budget was like 3 or 4 times that of the original. Put it all together, and it has all the freshness, all of the energy of the original, but just a more streamlined, better version of it. So for me, it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it, remember I got that playlist right over there where I've ranked a whole bunch of the iconic horror franchises. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.